A reading from Voyage by Jonathan Garthwaite. Part 1. Nishar. With the monitors skipping in statically faded images shimmering upon his pitch-metal armor, 3 leaned forward. The drone's massive head obscuring the view from behind, the ethereal woman craned her neck, peering on. Her form, or image, no more clearly defined than those upon the flickering monitor, she began to speak. 3 cut in. No, not plain sentimentality. Not so much so, at least. Just thought to go over something. It's nice to see you again. Something? For the 10,000th odd time? Dismissed the ghost sharply. Turning from the drone, she reached two-handedly, tasseling long, nearly waist-length, lightly brown-streaked blonde hair. With an air of gathering impatience, or perhaps frustration, she crossed the control deck with sweeping strides. He, male incarnate as 3 thought himself to be, continued to observe the images, his head now mere inches from the screen. The crimson radius of his eye constricting slightly, he said, "There's something here, though I just can't put my finger on it. The key to understanding why we find ourselves in transit. These people are obviously your people, that place, your homeworld." "Go on," scoffed the woman, chuckling. "For the stars and for so many times. I tell you, why ask me? Oh yes, I've faint memories of it, perhaps. But they could very well be dreams. Pre-programmed hallucinations, for all I'd know." With a sharp cluck of tongue and further tasseling of hair, she added with a sigh, "If you can't figure it out, no one could. Dare I say, no one ever will." "Perhaps," returned 3 with grim regard. Leaning back in the chair, turning from the screen to lay a cyclopean vision upon the view shield, 3 was only slightly conscious of the continuing footage, though he knew it all by heart, or being, as in his case. A heavily bearded fellow, an amateur reporter obviously, expounding maniacally upon what he'd never fully been able to understand. Sweat trickling from his forehead, the ragged character leaned closer to the camera. "And this is it, you lazy bastards," he exclaimed. "Just look at what slipped through the cat flap while you've all been asleep. I myself am none too happy. Couldn't see it coming, eh? Well, I could, and for the longest time at that, I'll have you know." Tugging at a disheveled confusion of shoulder-length hair, saliva dripping in long strings from his jowls, he began an even more swervingly incoherent and curse-filled monologue. His image, turning from the screen, in dramatic gesticulation to the sky, faded to black. "Something in this segment tickles my brain, though what?" uttered 3. "Just what is the man pointing to in the sky? There's nothing there. Do you concur?" As if attempting an escape of the vessel, the ghost now wavered dimly from her newly acquired position, in partial protrusion from the ship's hull. She soon faded altogether, as had the man's screen image seconds before. Noting the other's sudden departure, a numbing sense of dread grasped 3's inner core. He reached with a jolting lurch, a giant metallic palm slapping a red illuminated console button. "Image regeneration possible in 8 months, 3 days, 16... Exasperated, he slapped the orb again, thus cutting the ship's voice. He returned a semi-focusing eye to the shield. Beyond the curved and heavily reinforced plexiglass, a deep blue star blur continued, as it had for longer than he could bring himself to recall. Glancing upon another monitor then, he noted the ship's, Nishar's, current position. The readout, its coordinates, meant nothing to him. With an unvoiced sigh, he raised himself, the metal joints of his knees grinding audibly as he pushed back the chair and came to stand. Such time. How long, he wondered. Given an eternally repetitious return to his holding cabin, by slow-footed march, the ghost's absence began weighing heavily upon his mind, a mind so old he could not remember coming to be. Where and how were you, yourself, brought to be? Of this I often wonder, Eva. Are you, in fact, real? Speaking these words aloud, he brought the restraint harness about his legs and shoulders. "Good night all the same, lass," he said. His eye, within the otherwise all-encompassing pitch, grew dim before fading completely. With the silent closing of a door, inches before him, he fell to slumber. Dreams of such a nature as to be perhaps unrepeatable, perhaps plainly non-relatable to any of his kind, if any did remain somewhere far away, began to saturate his mind. Such fantasies governed by an overwhelming sense of compression, his body adrift under miles of some great black ocean, its weight enough to crush his skull. "Adomna!" he cried, his eye flickering involuntarily. Its unconscious spectrometry came once again, just as abruptly, to fade. If there had been a soul to take in the scene at that moment, all that could have been heard or seen would have been the perpetual roar of distant engines and darkness. 8 relative months later, 3 wakened himself with a consciously pre-programmed jolt. Releasing himself from the harness, the door rising before him, he strode along the seemingly boundless corridor. Some time into his journey, his head lolled, sweeping to and fro in absent-minded motion as he stepped. This was a fashion familiar to him upon lengthy times of leg stretching, though he did not hold any notion as to this peculiar habit's possible origin. Raising his head, he realized himself at that moment not to be fully conscious. He stopped in worriment, looking back, but all he could sense, beyond what his eye could illuminate, was nothingness. "Nishar," he stammered, his eye to an unseen ceiling. "Drone 3, acknowledged," responded the voice instantaneously. He began to speak, though found he could not. "Nishar, awaiting response," Control prompted. "It's, good to hear you," he said. Dropping his head, he walked on. The voice did not respond, as he knew it would not. He came to sit before the console, its bank of screens. With delicately applied fingertips, he traced a sequence of rapidly transitioning illuminations, his fingers soon becoming a shadowy blur across the console's surface. In grim consideration of this, he imagined his actions automated, as if played out in eternal rerun. "Nishar, acknowledging," spoke Control. His fingers coming to rest, one of many looped recordings stuttered to life before him. This was with no beginning nor conclusion, no reason for being at that, so he mused dimly. "Go on, as Eva always says when she's about," he whispered. "Lay it on me for once, the key to all this, why don't you?" The screen flickering in its perpetual manner, given the recordings at hand, he looked on in silence. He'd cut the sound, and now all that could be distinguished were people's movements, their body languages, and so forth. Frenetic to the point of absurdity. He laughed inwardly. "I do sometimes wish I could actually laugh," he spoke. "Such an endearing quality, though I'd die trying, I'm sure." After a subliminal moment's contemplation, he did try, while for the first time, or for as long as he could remember. Much to his own amusement, a low and unbroken monotone met his audio pickups. Fading to silence, this cyclically voiced growl was replaced by a descending sense of dismay which, as if ashen lead, came to settle about his shoulders. Reclining in the chair, he thought of Eva in the moment of her first appearance, once upon a time, so long ago. He thought of Eva, the name itself. This had always struck within him a deeply embedded, however indefinable sense of familiarity, of singly directed purpose, perhaps. "I am Eva," she had said. "What is this place?" 3, having stationed himself before the console that day, would later consider in passing that he, had he an organic heart to begin with, would surely have suffered an attack of that bodily organ while given so inexplicable an appearance. "What in the stars are you? Am I not alone here?" he eventually managed to utter. Turning towards him, her eyes gazing strangely afar, or perhaps shyly, for he did not know, to somewhere, some point beyond his shoulder, she had smiled thinly. He remembered her noting, as if dreamily to herself, her eyes filling with sudden tears. "I do not know. What are you in question?" 2 days later, a day shy of Eva's possible regeneration, 3 was back in his holding compartment, dreaming his dreams of black, body-shattering compression. This premature retirement was brought about by the realization that he was no longer comfortable, for reasons he did not quite comprehend, to so much as glance her flickering visage, that is, if ever it should reappear. Eva did appear, 20 days late of his leave, studying absently the shield's star blur as she did so. "Nishar, acknowledge," she spoke at length, her expression conveying much perplexity. "Passenger 431, acknowledged," returned Control. "Where is the machine?" she asked, adding quickly, "Where is 3? "Drone 3 is currently in holding cabin 12. She blinked, turning her head from the ceiling into the starlight once again. "I see," she said flatly. "Eva, out." She left the control deck, returning to her own holding compartment without movement. In a further moment, she, as with the drone, found herself gone from wakeful being. "For the millionth odd time," she whispered, before then coming to fade completely. Down, down, down and on he went, without apparent end, though he knew there to be an end, as he was all too familiar with this particular nightmare. "Go on," he heard himself say. This slight break in the seemingly pre-programmed dream was a new concept, a subtle shift in the eternal hallucinatory cycle. The visually grainy dream, reeling before his mind's eye, flickered as he contemplated this irregular mental blip. Can I in fact control my dreams, he wondered. Instead of eventually breaching the hull of the rotted, decomposing star hauler, as always he had, the hauler lying in waste upon the bottom of that unknown ocean, he thought, yes, perhaps I can. He dreamed some more as, for the 4th time by their last meeting, Eva's ethereal form appeared in partial protrusion from the control deck's starboard wall, and just as promptly vanished. Returning sullenly to her compartment, she felt the sweeping, all-obliterating hand of stasis become her. "Oh, I mean that much to you, do I, 3?" she thought she heard herself say. "Well, so be it. Go dream your life away, as shall I, from this point forward. Stars forsake it all." Her fading mind turned to a man. She thought his name to be Adomna. Grimly, she mused, this man had once, possibly, been her friend. Had they both, at some unknowable time, set forth within this hulk? She thought he may even have loved her, and she him. It is not just a dream. He is real, as am I. They, Adomna, 3, both are real. And then, for the untold 1000th time, she was gone. 3 awoke in an instant, some 33 further millennia down the line, prompted by the ship's control computer. "Drone 3, respond," it spoke. "Acknowledged," he replied. "Destination in 3 days." In stunned consideration of these words, "What?" he uttered at length. "Destination in 3 days. Are you in need of attention, Drone 3? Queried Control. No, I am not, Nishar. I am functioning normally." "A drone has been dispatched," Control responded. With that, the line went dead between them. "Oh, stars," he said absently, his mind lagging, almost uncomprehending of the situation at hand. He had been awakened, for once, not from the lineally black maritime nightmare, but from a dream held fast for some moments in time. A field of lush grass, a child by his side. The youngster had pulled two-handedly at the little finger of his right hand. "Dance with me, 3," he'd heard her titter. Although the language in which she spoke came across as foreign and wholly unfamiliar to him, he'd nonetheless found himself, perhaps on some subliminal level, understanding of the words. Rising upon tiny feet, he'd obliged her, smiling inwardly as she attempted to swing his hulk about her small frame. He remembered making it seem as if she had. Squealing with delight, she exclaimed, "I love you, 3." Turning his head from her, and as he twirled, he recalled spotting a small music player upon the grass. He'd held its gently conveyed words at length at the time, as well as the words of the child, though, desperately as he now tried, he found his tune slipping from his brain. "All bound for Morningtown, many miles away," he murmured. Unbuckling himself, the door rising before him, he came patiently to stand. He took in the never-faltering roar of distant engines, his hands coming snugly to rest behind the small of his back. This action played out as if by fearful, well-ingrained learning. He fought frantically to focus upon the scene now immediately before him. Seamless metal, though broken in linearity by oddly jagged edifices of stars knew what, he could only guess. Before long, there was a rumbling to be heard, ever so faint above the far engine's monotonous din. Upon his eye's limitation, a small robot appeared, trundling itself along in track-wheeled fashion. He turned about, placing his hands in autonomously unthinking recall upon the wall. He stood, the other coming to an abrupt halt behind. The dimest glow of an X-ray scan he saw, bouncing off the wall before him. With a voice of dully conveyed monotone, Drone 3 acknowledged it spoke. Pivoting on heel, he gazed down on the thing and said nothing. "Drone 3 acknowledge," reiterated the other. "Do you know, contraption, I could crush you with one finger," he thought to say. With an unspoken curse, he turned to his side and began to step, leaving the seemingly unseeing drone to squat, to face the wall. "Drone 3 acknowledge," it said, its voice now booming with a sharply conveyed rise in octave. He walked on. "Drone 3, spoke the voice of Nishar, you shall terminate any self-directed business. Remain as you are." He halted, knowing all too well not to push the limitations of the control computer, as so often he had in times past. If there'd been another of his kind in acceptable operation aboard, they, both he and Control, knew he would long since have been vanquished to the void. "You know I'm right, Nishar. Give up this pantomime, will you?" he said at length. "Abortive situation detected. Reconciliation program initiated," came the response. "Oh, stars forsake you," he returned, and outwardly conveyed stress to his voice. Within a minute, he found himself surrounded by a myriad of otherwise long dormant, now wakeful drones. Wakeful as these bastards could ever be, he considered, the first of the machines wrapping its girth around his. Hours on end of unvoiced, excruciating pain followed as he lay upon a table, enduring without restraint what the drones had to give him. "I am all right now," he declared in hope to the ceiling. Minutes of silence, unspeakable silence, followed these words. "Drone 3 acknowledge," prompted the voice then. Yes, I acknowledge," he spoke, the response erupting from him with a carrying, no less than pleading, lilt. "Drone 3 reinstated." "Acknowledged, Nishar. Acknowledged," he he said, his voice fading to whisper. Burying his head within a massive arm, he turned from the drones. 2 days subsequent to this, by ship's orders, he found himself waking a crew of sizable number. As this was, most surprisedly so. A crew he held absolutely no recollection of, no knowledge whatsoever as to their on-board existence. In stunned consultation of a readout card, the card handed to him by a drone who'd quickly appeared, before just as quickly vanishing, by transmission, he called to Eva. Though he did not know why he'd chosen the woman first, as her call number, 431, appeared many lines down the list, of which he scrolled. Her entry simply read, Eva, passenger 431. There appeared, beyond the non-alphabetically ordered names, a passenger number, occupation, age, and so on. He then noted Adomna's entry, some lines down. This entry did neither sport anything other than first name and passenger number. He called to Adomna upon whim, before starting from the top then. Perron, Nishar's captain, Barash, the ship's commander, and so on, down the line. He stopped. Some milliseconds elapsed as he forcefully drew himself from the altogether odd, seemingly purposeful omission of any extraneous data, the merest scrap of information relating to either of these beings, Eva and Adomna. Upon further thought, he decided against allowing himself any continued consideration of Control's stone silence regarding this. In grudging dismissal of these vagaries, he returned to calling names. Franish, Kalal, Duankas, 3, Burkush, Anat. Drone 3, halt, interrupted Control, as people then began to appear by some distance. As if ghosts, their wavering forms approached in lines from along the seemingly endless corridor, from its far limitation, of which 3 knew nothing, had never so much as contemplated. Control's voice rattling on in coldly clinical admonishment, he strained his vision, trying to glimpse a possible silhouette of Eva. The woman must surely resemble her image, so easily recognizable it indeed was to him, given all those times she'd visited upon deck. He saw no woman, only a collective row of grayly emaciated, bearded faces. Abortive situation detected. Reconciliation program initiated, announced Control in lengthy conclusion. Oh, stars, he murmured, as if at once realizing his mistake. Yes, I announced 3, didn't I? I called upon myself. Before 5 minutes were out, he was again on the table. Gathering around him were the same drones as before, the very same, or so it appeared. Yes, indeed, the very same entourage of unthinking, unfeeling, nasty little machines, he noted, as if distantly to himself. One of these machines, the same highly skilled lead torturer as before, he wondered, began dousing his mind with a cyclical array of gamma-wave triggers. While the thing increased the resonance of these waves by relentless gain, he fought desperately to focus upon a hopeful escape of the pain. Managing this to an extent while, by some moments' lapse, he began a studious consideration of the most inexplicable question. Where had they come from, this crew? What was the place they were shortly to set down upon? Who was Eva? And, for that matter, the man, Adomna. This man, whom he'd never encountered, though of whom she'd so often mentioned. Aside all this, perhaps above it all, he noted for the first truly self-admitted time that he held absolutely no recollection as to his own origin, let alone that of anyone else. "To the void with you, Nishar! To the void with you!" he screamed, fighting for these words. This verbal outburst, erupting from his audio relay as if by its own volition, he felt his mind begin to come apart. With another drone joining the force of the first, he laid his head upon the table. The sheer solemnity hung now almost unbearable. With every cycling octave, a fresh piece of his being was torn asunder. Narrowly avoiding Deimos in its eternal circlings, the ship entered the planet's atmosphere. White flames streaked across the shield, illuminating the control deck in brief flickering entirety as Amouche Perron began, ever so sluggishly, to buckle himself into his long, vacated seat. With a forceful grunt, locating himself to his satisfaction, the captain turned to 3. "So, my stout metal friend, where you say we'd be?" Looking on incredulously, 3 replied at length, "Captain Perron, Control's destination." "Destination?" spat the other, as if in disgust. "Destination, you say?" His attention remaining on 3 for some moments, he turned his sights to a small box, the box welded to the floor beside his seat. While much to 3's curiosity, the man's actions appeared regulated, as if by some strange manner of automation. "This rings a bell," mumbled Perron, reaching down. His eyes lit up. "Ah, here we are. An answer, perhaps," he said. Fire continued to leap and dance across Nishar's plexiglass as, all the while, the ship maintained a steady descent. Soon, a horizon of filthy red oxide began to fill the shield. "Nishar!" barked the captain, turning his eyes from an anciently yellowed and very delicate wad of papers in hand. "What is this gobbledygook?" "Nishar has taken such liberty upon itself as to name this world Mars, Captain," spoke the voice. The man, turning his head briefly to the ceiling, settled a perplexed gaze to the oncoming scene. Go on," he said. "Very well, then." His mind still reeling from the most horrendous repatriation session thus far endured by him, 3, in study of the captain's gaunt visage, held but one urgently pressing desire. He so very much wanted to ask of the skeletal, grunting fellow if he himself held any knowledge as to the Voyage's nature, its reason for being, at that. He stepped forward to the man's side. In attempt to speak, though while given a sudden acknowledgment of sorely lacking will, he at once found any such words non-forthcoming. He retreated in confused dismay of himself. The man, turning briefly to glance him up and down, returned a dull and goggle-eyed gaze to the shield. Within another few minutes, they were stationary for the first time in untold millennia, the ship resting upon outstretched landing legs, its engines stuttering a time or two, before falling silent. From that particular moment onward, and as he managed ever so slowly a recuperation from Control's final repatriation session upon his being, 3 could not rightly bring himself to believe in time, fundamental, nor its passage. A great span of ages came to pass as, all the while, to his ever-watchful eye, these appeared no more nor less than a collection of scurrying whimsies and distraction. Given the universally cyclical nature of things, and as so often may eventuate during such lengthy periods of time given to collectively cultural reigns, upon Mars it had been no different. Lineages of folk, family empires, and legacies surged, dwindled, and, in due course, died away. 3 sat, visualizing Eva's static ghost upon Nishar's long darkened screen. The ship, within the dimming past, had been declared a museum of sorts, an historical artifact, as had 3, in a sense. He had been relegated, with much timeless passage, beyond Mars's initial occupation, as worker drone, common laborer, nanny, cook, miner, and so on. Only he, 3, now survived, as the world continued to turn its face from Sol. As the days had grown shorter, the nights longer, the winds absolute in their unrelenting and all-obliterating force, 3 had come, seeking refuge within the colonizer transport's passageways. The ship, the only man-made structure to have thus far survived the doom-fueled gales, had long since become his only sanctuary. from an otherwise certain death. For untold centuries on end, as in waves, the world's dwindling population succumbed to total extinction, and as the long retreating tides came completely to still, 3 remained. As to why Nishar, its potential of salvation, had remained forever unutilized by the hands of the able-bodied, ever-decreasing populace, this had lent 3 a great deal of puzzlement, well over much time. But now, this veritable lifeboat was of no worth to any soul but his own, if ever he so chose. Irrelevant of such possibility, he remained only to sit and stare, to wonder after Eva. It was forever Eva, in particular, upon whom his mind would dote. Who, for that matter, had been Adamna? One day sitting in habitual cross-legged fashion within the control deck, the winds howling inaudibly beyond the hull, he at once simply thought to ask. Why, he mused, so novel a thing to do. Has this ever struck me before? Such effrontery, to ask control so directly. Surely it wouldn't be allowed. Why, for that, does control remain in the least functional? Toiling with himself as to this first uncertainty, he sensed a wave of self-directed shame wash across his wide shoulders. Cringing inwardly, he began hesitantly to speak. Knowledge, Nishar. Vocal pattern recognition, drone 3. Allowing a pause for potential understanding, he said, Who is Adamna? Who, for that matter, is Eva, passenger 431? Control, please respond. After some moments' silence, Nishar's long-muted voice replied in inexplicable adoption of the long-gone woman's vocal structure. Her voice, having remained forever clear within his mind, startled him. While apart from his own self-directed musings, it was the first voice he'd chanced to hear in so long a time. He flinched involuntarily upon the carpeting as Control's system responded. Hello, dear 3. Upon a monitor before him, a greatly broken image flickered to life. While however vague this image might have been, Eva's form remained to his eye unmistakable. In distortion of a faint silhouette, her image danced by static line across the screen. Returning a non-directed gaze, an outline of lips he could see, these forming the slightest perception of a smile. Tall and slim in appearance, the silhouette wore an ankle-length red dress. As with the dress, her hair whipped wildly about her. By eye-catching regard, he supposed this audio-visual flourish symptomatic of the present age, an acknowledged sign of the times, perhaps. She began, Though dead, Adamna and I remain within your care, in essential form. This world's pioneers are dead, as is the world itself. The ship, however, remains, ready and functional as the day it came to be. Given a sudden sound of wind, a drawn-out, somewhat melodramatic whoosh, an eruption from the speakers, she turned, pointing to a dull red sky. Look, 3, there is Earth up there, our planetary neighbor, forming, coming to be, some said. He turned his gaze to the upper left corner of the screen, to where the image gestured. A bright, blue-green speck wavered, shimmering. I've sometimes wondered about it, she said. This world dies, another perhaps evolves. For the first time meeting his eye directly with hers, she continued, her image now but scattered static upon the screen. Go, carry our story onward, 3. Make a new beginning for us all. Turning then to the swirling, red-recorded dust, 3 reached for her. Eva! Eva! He cried. I don't know what to do. Please, please wait. Who are you? Tell me. Tell me who you are. Tell me who you are. His voice trailing from him, he buried his forehead within a massive palm. With the screen fading towards black, the voice spoke for a final time. So faint as it was, his audio pickups strained as he turned again to the monitor. A small white dot lingered, fluctuating by the slightest increment with each uttered word. I was never but a function of control, of Nishar. I know this now to be true, that I am a guardian, a program of Eva and Adamna's structural DNA. I am a fail-safe measure, it could be said. Though Nishar has been informed in this matter, the hopeful outcome remains within your hands. Remember, importantly now, there is truth to be found in dreams. Do well, 3. This program has run its primary course. He stared at the screen, uncomprehending. He began. I have missed you so much. The dot then fading altogether. I don't want to be alone, he whispered. Years more passed as he remained, never moving before the darkened screen. As the last traces of oxygen dissipated from the world's atmosphere, the ground continued relentlessly to quake. Molten sludge surged forth in vast sweeping tides before layer upon layer, coming to cool over former seaplains. With the detection of any relayed word forms having become long since once again so utterly unfamiliar to him by dormancy, for a moment he wondered what must be meeting his audio pickups. Raising his head ever so slowly, "Control, is that you?" he asked. As if a flurry of delicately structured snowflakes, Nishar's word forms came to settle upon his mind. While opposed to any previous communique of which he'd ever experienced, he felt Control's conveyance to be so very gentle in nature. With an almost apprehensive lilt of voice, Control spoke. "Departure sequence activated. Awaiting coordinates. Captain 3, to your directive. Respond." 3 craned his neck, looking on in stunned disbelief to the ceiling, the speakers upon it having remained for so long a time quiet until now, just now. While so informally this dialogue had been conveyed, as if to give the impression that they, Control and he, had been in conversation by no more than a moment beforehand, 3 gathered himself by much will. Eventually he managed to speak. On down the line, Nishar. To your discretion, let us simply depart this place. Engage." Steadying himself to his feet, he reached forward. His fingers fluttering to a blur, he traced a sequence of rapidly transitioning illuminations. Sometime subsequent of that departure, white-blue flames enveloped the shield in cautious descent. Hands clasped firmly behind the small of his back, Nishar's adopted captain looked on. This has been part 1 of Voyage, a 3-part story by Jonathan Garthwaite. Voyage is available in paperback through Amazon.com.